just get started here. My name is Gordley. And a little bit about me. I live in Chicago. I'm a machine learning engineer at Telnix, and I did my undergrad at Notre Dame, and I'm doing a master's right now at Vanderbilt in computer science. And my day-to-day involves working with LLMs, embeddings, RAG applications. At Telnix, we offer open source or hosted open source language models like Llama and Mistral as an endpoint, and integrate that with our cloud storage so you can upload things like PDFs and embed them and then ask questions about them to get answers with sources from different models. So it's a really cool project to be working on. And obviously I enjoy this stuff in general. So a lot of my personal projects too revolve around these topics. Yeah, you want me to keep going through? I've got like a couple slides about the project itself too.
Yeah, man, go for it.
Sure. So when I was working on this personal project, I just thought, it would be nice if I had like an assistant that I could talk to help manage my calendar, because my meetings pile up and sometimes I forget things. So my problem statement here is like, how can we leverage natural language processing to make managing and accessing Google Calendar easier and more intuitive for users? And the user in this case was just myself. So the answer that I came up with was a LangChain and Google Calendar API integration. So on the right there, you can see what the final product looks like. That's the little chat interface that you're very familiar with, where you have like the chatbot greeting you, and then you're able to ask questions about your calendar. It'll call the Google Calendar API and then answer questions that you have about it. And then it can also take actions like creating and deleting events on your calendar. So it can not only just show you information, it can also help you manage it. And I thought this would be a good point to show a little bit of it in action here. So here I have my calendar on the left. I scheduled a test event tomorrow morning, just for a little bit of reference here. So the flow, you just log in with Google authentication here, and then it'll load the calendars that you have. So I have the two calendars, holidays in the United States and my personal one, and then a little greeting. So I'll just start with, what events do I have coming up in the next few days? And then it'll take a second to think here. And it found that I had the webinar right now and the workout class coming up with, and it has like a nice natural language answer here. It can also, it's pretty powerful. So you can ask about events that are pretty far in the future and different types of events. So I can say, do I have any flights coming up in the next month? And I am taking a ski trip next month, so I do have some flights ready. We'll see if we can find them. And yeah, it figures out we've got a bunch of flights coming up, different trips and things like that. Even tells me safe travels, which is nice. And then you can create events, like I said, so it could take actions like, can you schedule a lunch for me tomorrow at noon? And then on the calendar here, we should see an event pop up. Yep, lunch here with a little created by Calvin watermark. And then we can delete the event as well. Can you delete my lunch tomorrow? And then hopefully it'll get rid of it here. Yep, it says it deleted it, but looks like it's still there. So, I mean, it's not perfect. There's different things that can go wrong in the background. Oh, it's gone. Great. Yeah. But it is worth mentioning. It's not perfect. A lot of times it's really hard to productionize these types of projects because there's different nuances in chat models, and different things can go wrong. But I'll go into a little bit of how the logic works for the overall application. I won't go into a lot of the base implementation steps here. So obviously for a project like this, you need Google Calendar authentication, you need a chat front end, back end, and some kind of user storage for the token. I wrote a little bit more about these in the blog post for this project. And there's plenty of resources online for these, but I wanted to go into the fun stuff, which is just the LangChain and OpenAI piece of it. And so the main implementation of a chatbot like this is as follows. You need to define tools. So you're not just conversing with a large language model, like asking how are you doing or asking for a trivia fun fact. You need it to actually be able to do things. And in order to do this, you can define tools, and LangChain makes it super easy for you to define tools, which are basically just a function. and with a description and then a set of parameters that will go into the function. And then once a language model has access to these tools, the functions it can use, LangChain has built-in agents that you can specify with just a few lines of code that can take a chatbot through the whole flow of executing several functions and then creating a response that will be usable for the user. And then obviously you have to connect this to some sort of backend so that you can access it. And so the best example that, is out there for defining tools for LLMs is straight from the OpenAI documentation. So they have this example, get current weather. So let's say you want ChatGPT to be able to tell you the weather in a certain location. So you can write a simple function, maybe that calls a weather API or just searches the internet, something like that. But what you're going to give OpenAI is a description of the function. So use this function when you want the weather, very simple. And it only has one input, which is location. And then on the bottom, you can see there what you do if you were looking to obtain the weather yourself if you were writing code. So I have a script set up here that is straight from their documentation that I wanted to showcase here, where you set up an OpenAI client in Python, the way that they do it, very simple. And then you have the tool that I mentioned. So you have a function that's called get current weather and has one input or two input properties, location and unit, but only one required property, location. And then it has a description for that. So the city and state, for example, San Francisco. And then you're just creating a chat completion, just calling the OpenAI endpoint here with a message. And I want to show just by default, adding a tool doesn't do anything. You need to actually, like OpenAI is what decides whether or not a tool needs to be called. So for now, I said, hi, how are you today? And I sent the tool. And I said, hello, I'm an AI and don't have feelings. The classic answer, didn't use a tool or anything. But what's interesting is when you start to, when the model decides to use that tool, so let's say, what is the weather like in Chicago? And then we'll call it here. And I have a little bit of extra parsing at the bottom here to determine that there's a tool call, but you can see that it decided for a tool call, get current weather, and gives you in JSON format the input for that function. So what you're going to do after you receive this JSON for the input is you would call the function on your own end to get weather or call weather API or whatever you need to do. And then you would send the result back to OpenAI to format in a better way for the chat. So that's just how tools, a basic example of how tools work in general. For this project specifically, for Google Calendar, there's a couple different tools that you need to make available to it. In this case, they're just API calls to the Google Calendar API. So things like listing events with inputs like the time min and time max, so you can give it a date range. Creating event, so you can create a new event with an event title, start date, and a couple other things if you want to invite people, which I haven't implemented yet, but things like that. And then deleting an event is the same thing, where you just give it the event ID. And the delete event is an interesting case because the LangChain agent has to decide first to list the event so it can get the event IDs, and then pass that to a delete event. So it's a multi-step process. It can't just be completed in one tool call. And so for that LangChain agent logic, like I mentioned, you have to define a prompt. So like you're a funny and friendly Google Calendar assistant. And then I found that it works a lot better if you include within the prompt the current date time, current time zone, current weekday, so that the bot can kind of orient itself when it's creating the function inputs and not get too confused. And then there's additional helper tools that I tried out, and this is all experimental, but a time delta function that basically gets the UTC time string for a future time. So it can help the bot calculate what the exact timestamp would be 7 days from now or 7 days and 1 hour from now to help create events in the right time zone and the right area. And then you initialize that agent executor with the chat model. So in this case, I'm using GPT 3.5, and you give it the prompt and the tools. And then here on the right, you can kind of see, I wanted to show some output of the backend here for a delete call. So you can see the user input right here was, can you delete my lunch tomorrow afternoon? Like the example that I showed. And you can see I included here a couple different additional things in the prompt, like the current weekday, current date time, like I mentioned. And then the agent will enter a new chain, and then it decided to invoke get future time with days equal to 1. And then you can see that the function was executed here. You get the future time, and then it was used as an input here for the end date of the search for get calendar events. So it got events in the range from right now till a day from now. So then it finds the lunch event, it has the event ID here, and then it deletes the calendar event using the ID. And then it eventually says the event deleted successfully, and then the model will send back, sure, I've deleted your lunch event tomorrow afternoon. And then the chain is finished. So this is kind of like that decision logic I mentioned. And this is very simple code that LangChain handles a lot of the back and forth between OpenAI and your program. So it'll invoke the functions for you. It'll call OpenAI to format the final answer for you, things like that. And it's just very, very useful. And so, yeah, with that, I wanted to give you some additional resources. Like I said, I have the blog post with more implementation details. All the code is open source, so you're welcome to take it, use it as, try whatever tools you want. A couple of function calling tutorials, LangChain agents, and I have another project with a very similar format, which basically executes terminal commands instead of a Google Calendar API commands. So, yeah, with that, I hope you enjoyed that little demo, and if you have any questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Jack. I do have a couple of questions. So I'm assuming that when you say functions and agents that are built into LangChain, I'm assuming you're using OpenAI functions agent in LangChain, right?
Yes. Yeah. I am. It's using the OpenAI specification for like agent executor. So I can actually show some of the code here. It's using OpenAI functions, agent output parser, and just the regular agent executor.
Gotcha. Do you have any operations or functions that you run in parallel, or everything is like one after the other?
Yeah, right now it's just one after the other. There's no extra processing going on or anything. And for an application like this, it really does have like sequential steps. It would kind of be hard to, for these simple kind of like operations. Like the delete one is the kind of the most complex the logic gets, where you have to list the events first and then delete the event that you want with the event ID. But yeah, nothing is going on in parallel right now.
That makes sense. So how tricky was it to make the Google Calendar API work with LangChain and OpenAI?
It was actually very easy. So it's kind of decoupled a little bit, which is nice. So in LangChain, well, actually outside of LangChain, so I'll define functions such as like create calendar event. And in that function, I'll have like the endpoint I need and all the logic for actually calling the Google Calendar API. So all that I need the model to do is decide that I need to call that function and then give me an input for it. So if I say, can you schedule a lunch for me tomorrow at noon? All I need OpenAI to do is decide that it needs to call create event, give me the inputs. So name is lunch and time is noon. And then once that's decided, LangChain will decide to invoke my function that it decided to call with those two inputs. So all the Google Calendar API logic is very decoupled from the language model logic itself. It's more just deciding that I need to call it on my end.
Yeah, for sure. That makes sense. Do you have any tips or tricks on how to like declare these functions so that they're more likely to be called when they're supposed to?
Yeah, so I can actually show an example here of a function that was giving me trouble. Let's see here. So
I know I ran into this issue a couple of times.
Yeah, I mean, there's always a little bit of the classic like being really, really direct with it and like almost yelling at it, like what it needs to do correctly. But I find that giving an example. So for here, I have my calendar event search input. So here for searching for a calendar, you have the start date, end date, like I mentioned, and a couple other things like calendar ID and user email. But for start date, I had a lot of trouble getting it to use the correct time format. So I made sure to specify the correct time format, mandatory time zone offset, and then I gave like some examples here, which actually helped it perform a lot better.
Gotcha.
So
And
yeah, I would just say being as verbose as possible and giving an example is almost the best you can do right now. But yeah.
Gotcha. And do you find if there was any like performance difference between like GPT 3.5 and GPT 4?
Yeah, actually, it's funny you asked that. So obviously GPT-4 is a lot slower, but I think the quality in this case was a lot better. There were cases where GPT 3.5 would claimed to schedule an event at noon, but it was actually like at 3 a.m. It was scheduled at 3 a.m. Because it got some kind of time zone incorrectly. But I found GPT-4 very rarely made the same mistakes. So just from kind of like an anecdotal perspective, it definitely seemed to have a better handle on the problem and was able to specify time zone a lot better. But like I said, there was a trade-off in terms of performance too. It was a lot slower. And when I was using it myself, it was kind of like, is it actually working in the background or is it just taking forever? Like it's nice to have like a quick response, I think, in this case. So I stuck with GPT 3.5 for like my personal use.
Yeah. So I remember during your demo, you were able to ask about your flights. So was it because your flights were visible on your calendar, or was it that the agent had access to like your Gmail or something?
Oh yeah, they were just on my calendar. I've got them up there. But it would be like a really interesting integration if you could, let's say, like use like the United Airlines API, or you can use any API that's available to you. Like if you have the login credentials or anything you need, all you need to do is specify a function that knows how to, with all the logic to call it, and like OpenAI will just decide like how to use the function based on your description of it. And so you can incorporate this with really any function that you can create. So like I said, any API. I have other projects where like I execute terminal commands, things like that.
Awesome. So what did you find that was like surprisingly easy, and what was like surprisingly difficult about this project?
I would say the easiest thing was getting like a proof of concept up and running. Like I said, LangChain makes it all very easy. You just define your tools and define your prompt, and then basically just run the agent executor, and then it's able to do very complex things like understand your query and like call Google Calendar. Like it's just a very impressive thing that can be done in just a few lines of code, and it's very exciting to me. That's why it's one of my favorite things about these kinds of projects is you can really get things working quick. The hardest thing I would say, unrelated to the actual like agent logic, was Google Calendar authentication and like Google Cloud Console setup is just very difficult.
Yeah.
That was one of my goals with the project, was to kind of take some of the difficulty out of the like base implementation. Like I said, like the chat bot, it's like the chat interface and the authentication, so that you can really focus on the important things with the project that are the capabilities, the tools you can use, things like that. So a lot of times getting like the external things set up can be pretty hard, but like the simplicity of setting up like a LangChain project, for example, is still very easy. And it is difficult to like productionize these things. Like how do you make sure that the event is scheduled correctly? Like you got to do a lot of testing, and there's a lot of these different edge cases that you can't even like think of because it's all with natural language. So it's hard to productionize these types of projects, but getting something that you can use for your own daily life like this is very simple.
Yeah. So speaking of stuff in production, have you seen any projects that you think have been like successful in production that have something to do with like agents or LLMs in general?
I haven't seen too many examples yet. I've actually got my eye out for that kind of thing as well, because I think it's still just such a new area, and like even think about the progress that's made in like the last year or so. But I don't think I've seen any like widely used projects that are in production that use this kind of like agent tool framework. But I think as OpenAI comes out with a lot more features, like for example, like I think you may not even need LangChain several months from now because OpenAI is kind of doing their own thing as well. I think more people are getting close to productionizing their projects like this. I've seen examples of that going wrong. Like there was a Honda dealership or something that had a chatbot that allowed someone to, basically like agreed to sell someone a Honda for like $1. Like that can't be happening in production. But I haven't seen too much of it yet, but I'm excited to see what comes about in the next few months.
Yeah, I remember the incident because I'm in like a few like Slack groups for like developers, and people are just sharing the links to like which dealership still has this on, so we can go mess with it. But yeah, it could be scary to see that in real life, because that could shut down like the entire like business.
Oh, yeah, exactly. If
so
you can convince it to say it's legally binding, I mean, you're in trouble.
I wonder if the guy actually got the car for $1.
Oh man.
So you mentioned you were working on a terminal or like a command line tool, right? So do you want to like,
Sure. Yeah, I can show. It was a very specific use case for the Android debug bridge. So this was a digital forensics project that was basically a chat here. This is an example of the front end. I use Streamlit, which is a really popular Python package for chat projects. But basically, you would plug in your Android to your computer, and then you could ask questions, and then it would have all the functions available from the Android debug bridge. The simplest example being, what is my battery percentage? And then it would decide to call that function, get the phone's battery percentage, return it to the user. And then here I actually implemented an additional info section of each response, which would show what action the bot decided to take. So in this case, it was get device battery level. And then it showed a little bit more about what command line tool was run. So in this case, it shows the command itself, like dump sys battery. And this was helpful, especially for the digital forensics use case. You need to make sure that you're able to back up your results and have like a really like solid explanation of how you got to certain things, make sure that things are reproducible. So if you're using a bot like this and kind of hand waving, that's not going to fly in court. So obviously this is more of like a demonstrative project, but in that case where you had to bring like evidence forward, you would need to make sure that you know exactly what was run and how.
Awesome. And this one is also available in open source.
Yeah, right? I linked it at the end of these slides too. I'll send you the link to these slides with some additional information. This project was honestly a lot simpler and could be like easier as a starting point too, because there was no authentication or anything. You just enter your OpenAI key and then choose a model and plug your phone in. But it was the same exact logic where you specify tools and then specify some functions that it can call, and then have LangChain do the heavy lifting in the back end to decide which tools to call OpenAI to decide which tools to call.
Have you any experience with like having too many functions or tools available to the agent that it doesn't know which one to choose?
Yeah, so you can definitely, as the tools start to stack up, you can like also go outside the context limit for like a LLM. So let's say you have like the entire Google API like set into tools. That's obviously gonna be way too many to fit into one ChatGPT prompt. So there's a technique that's being used right now. I haven't tried it myself, but it utilizes embeddings. So what you'll do is take all of your function definitions, all the descriptions, and then embed it in some sort of, or you vectorize the descriptions, and then you embed them using some kind of framework. I personally like Weaviate for my embedding storage, but then you'll do a similarity search on all of the different embeddings that you have saved, and you can say return the top 10 most relevant tools for that particular prompt. So if I was saying like, can I delete an event on my calendar, it would search all the different tools available, give like the top 2 most similar to deleting an event on the calendar, which would hopefully include the one we need, and then only pass those 5 to the model. There's a really good LangChain article about it. I'll actually put this in the slides. But it's I think it's tool retrieval.
Oh, I think I've seen that before.
Yeah, it looks like they've moved it, but I'll find it and send it to you. But yeah, tool retrieval using vectorization is a like advanced technique that can really help deal with, like it could bring down the context and not go over the context limit for different problems.
Yeah. I remember last year around like maybe March or April, I was like playing around with like the whole React agent paradigm, and everyone is talking about like how you can't go over 4 tools because once you go over 4 tools, it doesn't know what to do. So what I did at the time was I would have like the main agent have like 3 tools, but like each tool would be like a sub agent. So like the main agent will call it the sub agent, and then the sub agent will actually execute the actual task. But
that's a really clever way to do it. Actually, I like that. I can imagine it would get complicated to debug, but that's really cool.
Yeah, and it took forever because you know, it's like multiple chains. But now we have OpenAI functions and JSON format and all that stuff. So it's amazing.
Yeah, not to dish on LangChain at all, but like who knows? Like I said, if it'll be necessary in like 4 or 5 months from now, with OpenAI function calling like built in. I've seen a lot of buzz on Twitter. People just saying like things like they can implement that kind of logic themselves for more customizability. But it's definitely really powerful for getting up and running, like making a project like this and kind of doing the heavy lifting for you. But yeah, we'll see. Like, who knows if any of these technologies will be useful in 6 months? You know, things are advancing so rapidly.
For sure. So to wrap this up, where can people find you online?
I have. I guess you can find me on Twitter. I have like a personal blog website, gordles.io, with like, this was my first blog post, so I've got that going, but you can find some of my socials here. Feel free to email me. I'm in the AI Tinkerers Discord now, so you can always send me a message if you have any questions. Happy to help out. I love talking about this stuff, so feel free to reach out. Yeah, and thanks again for having me on. Like this is I love sharing this kind of stuff, and the reason I made the project was so that people can build on top of it and, you know, use this as inspiration and reference for other projects they want to do. So feel free to use any of this code. It's all open source.
Awesome. Thanks, Jack. I'll drop the link to the slide, the GitHub repos, and your social information in the description in this video. But yeah, that's it for the webinar. Thanks for coming on.
Great. Yeah, thanks for having me. It was nice meeting you. I hope to keep in touch too.